The house was silent. The last rays of the setting sun painted the room in hues of orange and pink. Standing by the window with a cup of coffee in hand, I stared out at the street below. My husband, Michael, had been away on a business trip for the past few days, and the quietness of the house was unsettling. It felt like an empty shell, with every corner reminding me of something missing. The doorbell rang, breaking my thoughts. I glanced at the clock, wondering who could be visiting at this hour. As I opened the door, I found Ethan, my neighbor from across the street, standing there with a small box and his familiar warm smile. "I thought you might like these," he said, holding out the box. Inside were neatly packed cookies. "I figured you could use some company." His gesture caught me off guard, but I didn't want to seem rude. I invited him in, heading to the kitchen to make some coffee. As I prepared the cups, I could hear his footsteps softly following me into the room. "The kitchen smells amazing," Ethan said, his voice calm but carrying an undertone of something more. Talking to him had always been easy, but tonight, the air between us was different, charged with something I couldn't quite name. We sat down at the table, and our conversation deepened quickly. We spoke of life's challenges, of loneliness, and the emptiness we sometimes felt. His words were chosen carefully, but each one seemed to touch a part of me I had tried to ignore. There was a pause. Our eyes met, and in that moment, no words were necessary. My hand hesitated, then moved toward his on the table. The brief touch sent a jolt through me, and I didn't pull back. "Ashley," he said softly, my name carrying a weight I couldn't ignore. "Sometimes, what feels right doesn't always seem right." I didn't reply. Instead, I felt myself leaning toward him, my breath catching in my throat. He closed the distance, his hand gently brushing against my cheek as his lips met mine. The kiss was tentative at first, but as the seconds passed, it deepened, becoming a shared release of everything we had been holding back. By the fireplace, the world seemed to disappear. Ethan's touch was deliberate yet tender, his hands guiding me as if we were the only two people in existence. The flickering light cast shadows across the room, blurring the lines between what was real and what was forbidden. "You amaze me," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "I didn't think you'd feel the same." "I didn't think I would either," I replied, my voice barely audible. But in that moment, logic and consequence melted away, leaving only the warmth of his presence and the undeniable pull of the connection between us. The night felt infinite, yet morning came too quickly. As I lay in bed, Ethan long gone, the weight of what had happened settled over me. I couldn't ignore the consequences, but neither could I regret the moments we had shared. Some boundaries, once crossed, change everything. That night, I had crossed a line I could never uncross. But perhaps what frightened me most was realizing that I wasn't sure I wanted to. For those moments, I forgot everything: who I was, what I stood for. Ethan's touch ignited a passion I had long buried, and his gaze made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. The way he held me, the way his whispers melted my defenses, it was intoxicating. I surrendered to the fire, letting it consume me completely, knowing deep down that this would leave a mark I couldn't erase. As I lay in bed that night, the weight of it all came crashing down. Every touch, every glance, every whispered word replayed in my mind, a vivid reminder of the line I had crossed. Some lines don't just change you, they redefine you, and I knew I could never return to who I was before.